Welcome back to the channel. 60 Minutes Bill Maher. There have been a few television shows this week that are trying to revisit COVID-19, a COVID-19 retrospective, so to speak. 60 Minutes is all about aerosol science, why we didn't clean up indoor air enough, and some companies and consultants that are happy to sell you a new HVAC system. And Bill Maher has Scott Galloway, who's the NYU professor of business, who's got quite a quote about the COVID-19 pandemic. So let's talk about these people coming through with the retrospective scope. Let's see what they got right and what they got wrong. First, let's do Scott Gallo. Let me read you the quote that he said on Bill Maher. This is from Overtime this week. By the way, I love Bill Maher's show. I got to admit that. Everyone knows that who knows me. So this is the quote from Scott Galloway. Quote, "I was on the board of my kid's school during COVID. I wanted a harsher lockdown policy. In retrospect, I was wrong. The damage to kids of keeping them out of school longer was greater than the risk. But here's the bottom line. We were doing our best, so let's give a little grace and forgiveness for the shit show that was COVID," end quote. And part of me wants to agree with him. I actually commend him for apologizing he got it wrong, but part of me knows that even through the retrospective scope, he's still not getting it right. So let's talk about it, shall we? Now, of course, there were some of us who not only now, but throughout the pandemic, were vigorously opposed to school closure. Myself, Vlad Kogan, we wrote many op-eds that this school closure was a catastrophe, that testing asymptomatic kids was a fool's errand, that making kids wear masks made no sense. The 6 feet of distance was literally pulled from someone's ass, and all these things worked to keep kids out of school for months and months and months, as long as 18 months in cities like San Francisco and Los Angeles. And ultimately, after all that effort, kids nearly all got COVID anyway. I think at this point it's got to be close to 100%. The CDC stopped when they got the zero prevalence at 96%. And the vast majority of kids got COVID-19 without getting prior vaccination. So we put their lives on hold for nothing. They all got COVID-19 anyway. And here's the kicker. They all did mostly just fine, because it turns out for a healthy child, COVID-19 is no greater threat than flu. And in fact, actually much safer than getting the flu, which is some risk that we've put up with for all these generations. Now, what about other people? Do school closures prevent the spread of COVID-19 in communities and populations? Does it benefit grandma? Actually, it turns out that we had data from August of 2020 from the Germans, where they took advantage of a natural experiment where they have staggered school closure, which showed convincingly that there was no effect on transmission in communities, and at most a very marginal effect. By 2021, we had a paper from the University of Southern California that estimated the case change from school closure to be so minuscule that it has no real impact in the broader community dynamics. Kids are mostly resilient from the virus. School closure doesn't benefit other people. And it turns out in Sweden, they actually kept elementary schools open and in person. It turns out in Europe, they reopened rapidly, long before they got vaccines. Only this country, and not all of this country, by the way, only left-leaning Democratic stronghold cities controlled by teachers' unions had a prolonged school closure. DeSantis reopened schools in April of 2020 because he knew what was up. He understood this calculation. So when Scott Galloway says, the damage to kids of keeping them out of school was greater than the risk, he's acting like he just figured that out. Most of us who can read, who can appraise the risk of COVID-19 by age and compare it against the risk of learning losses from school closure, we knew that in 2020. So I think many of us would be frustrated to hear him finally come to the conclusion that we were shouting. Now, he didn't just say his conclusion, and by him I mean him and other people like him, to keep schools closed. They actively censored and suppressed the point of view of those who disagreed with them. They dethrottled these accounts on social media. They banned certain types of communication. On this platform, some videos have been demonetized for taking a position contrary to the quote-unquote establishment view. So not only were they happy to put forth their erroneous view, they wanted to squash the speech of those who opposed them. And I think most notably, Jay and Martin and the Great Barrington Declaration, which called for schools being open, was something that the media consistently criticized and demonized, even though that they were right. And actually, that one thing alone, even if you put aside all the other areas of disagreement, that one thing alone would have been such an incalculable good to have kept schools open globally that it would have far outweighed any effect of all the other policy conclusions, I think. Back to this. We were doing our best. We want forgiveness. I'm happy to forgive the random person on the street who thought school closure was a good idea. I'm happy to forgive the random person on the street. They don't know any better. But you know who I don't forgive? I don't forgive anyone who says that they're an epidemiologist and supported school closure. I don't forgive anyone who says they're an ID doctor and supported school closure. And I don't forgive anyone who says that they're a professor and supported school closure, because you have to pull your head out of your ass and read the papers yourself. And I know you didn't do it, because I've had so many conversations with people who didn't do the work. They took the position of school closure largely reflexively out of their own personal fear, and also because of the groupthink, the fact that their friends, who tend to be on the political left, were all taking stock and trade quotes from Anthony Fauci, following him in line without critical thinking of their own. And because of this, I think they are culpable. When you are somebody who has a title and you're capable of reading, you can't just bow down to Anthony Fauci. You have to read the papers yourself. And if you did, you would have invariably come to the conclusion that I came to, and that Vlad Kogan came to, and that my colleagues came to, which was that school closure was a catastrophic mistake. I actually said repeatedly in 2021 that it is a domestic policy error as big as the Iraq War. It will go down in history with the same impact as the Iraq War. It was false information that led us into it. It was fear that led us into it. It was a response absolutely disconnected and out of proportion to the instigating event. And it was something that just is a self-inflicted wound. It didn't make us safer. It made us weaker, and it hurt a generation of kids. We haven't even run the final tally. When we run the final tally on what happened to these kids, it's going to be catastrophic. They're not yet old enough to see the impact of school closure. So, Scott Galloway, I appreciate you say I'm wrong, but honestly, I'm sympathetic to all the people on the social media who say, go fuck yourself, because you didn't listen and you weren't really paying attention to the actual data. And so, frankly, the less you comment about things you don't read into, the better going forward. Now let's talk about 60 Minutes. 60 Minutes has a great article about ventilation. And they say the original sin of the pandemic was that we didn't understand that improved indoor ventilation would have been the ticket. Of course, they say masks work, even cloth masks work a little. They say that because they're incapable of reading randomized controlled trials. Even in a biased randomized controlled trial like Bangladesh, which is biased, as I've explained on this channel before, even in that study, cloth masks didn't work. So you really want to tell me that cloth masks did something? You have to be so out of your goddamn mind. They're of course saying that in their piece. But let's come back to the ventilation part. Now, would ventilation have been a benefit? Perhaps. Actually, I think perhaps in some settings. Do we have evidence for that? No. We could have done randomized control trials of changing out the HVAC system and measure the spread of respiratory viruses in that area. One of the places people really wanted to put those HVACs in is schools. And they said, we need to put the HVACs in schools before we can reopen schools safely. That was categorically false, because all of the kids who go to school, whether you put all the HVACs in or not, they all got COVID-19 anyway, and most got it before vaccination. You didn't need to put the HVACs in. You could have just let school run naturally, and there would have been no difference in outcomes. Now that the pandemic is over, they want to say that putting in these expensive air filtration systems is a benefit to a company. The one they talked about in the channel was something that cost $2.5 million. Is that a benefit? Well, it depends on what you might otherwise spend the money on. There's opportunity costs from spending the money. And I find it hard to believe that there's any school in America where the best use of $2.5 million is to revamp the ventilation system. Probably for most schools in America, the best use of that money is to actually put that into educating the kids in that school. Okay. And if you want to prove that the ventilation system actually prevents year-over-year days lost from learning, then you need to run a randomized control trial. The study that they cite in their little paper, Increasing Ventilation Reduces SARS-CoV-2 Airborne Transmission in Schools, a retrospective cohort study from Italy's Marche region. It says it is a retrospective study that compares classrooms that got mechanical ventilation, 316, against 9,000 that didn't. Well, it turns out there probably something else different about those 316 classrooms. So the comparison is not just the ventilation system, but the kinds of places in this little place in Italy that would have shelled out the cash for such ventilation system. If you want to do the study correctly, you would randomize the places. You wouldn't just look at the places that got it done. If you look at the places that have certain things versus the places that don't have things, you might find that Schools where children get dropped off in Mercedes-Benzes, they have better educational outcome than schools where kids get dropped off in Toyota Yaris's. So maybe we should buy parents Mercedes-Benzes to improve test scores. It's called confounding. And honestly, the reason this paper is published in a rag journal is because, of course, it is a rag of a paper. It's not published in any good journal. And they actually cite this in the 60 Minutes story as if it's evidence. It's literally something so terrible that I would rip it in half, okay? I mean, nobody would believe it. And if you swapped out ventilation and you just changed it to ivermectin, you might even find a similar association, or you changed it to some other expensive mitigation effort. That's the problem with retrospective observational studies. They're not really useful from a causal purpose. They are telling us that it's worth it to make this change going forward. There's one part of this story in 60 Minutes that's absolutely correct. COVID-19 was an airborne illness. The part that's absolutely not correct is that in 2023, we should spend money on all these sort of building upgrades. If you want to prove that spending money on the building upgrades is beneficial, run a cluster randomized control trial. Pick any type of building. Pick churches, pick schools, pick offices, pick whatever the hell you want to pick, and take 1,000 and make 500 have the building upgrade and 500 don't, okay? And then measure over the next 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 12 weeks or 1 year how many respiratory viruses. And then you're going to say, wait a second, well, we prevent the virus from being spread in our building, but over the course of a year, of course you're going to get the virus in other places. And then you're going to say, that doesn't mean it doesn't work in the building. Actually, yes, it means it doesn't work in the building. It means that even if you pour all this money into that building, you can't control the rest of the world. And at the end of the year, it's a total wash. That means you shouldn't put the money into the building, actually. You don't understand how science works. You have to show your intervention works against the backdrop of people living their lives. So if you can't show that, you're not even close. You're not even close to proving that this is a valuable intervention. You don't even have fundamental efficacy, let alone cost effectiveness. Probably when you tabulate all the money it would take to do all these things, you can think of a million things we might do that are better for people. Providing them adequate nutrition, better things to eat for lunch. I don't know the answer, but I'm doubtful that HVAC systems in building is the highest yield. And the people who put forth this message, I think there's two problems. One is 60 Minutes, would it kill you to get one person on your show that might have an ounce of criticism for it? Is it reporting when you only get people who are selling a service? In some examples, people are consultants for companies. Of course, if I was a consultant selling you a clean air building, I have a perverse financial incentive to exaggerate the evidence supporting clean air buildings, don't I? I'm the consultant in that business. And what you're running is not news. It's an advertisement for my business, my consulting business. 60 Minutes is just a garbage plot. I mean, what happened to you 60 Minutes? When I was growing up, you used to have some good stuff on. Now the entire mainstream media has gone down the toilet. New York Times headlines aren't even close to being accurate. I don't know what to think. So, masking, I think in randomized control trials didn't make much of an impact. Masking kids, there are no randomized control trials because people didn't study that. School closure, catastrophic error, not the kind of one you only know in retrospect, the one you knew at the outset. And the real problem is that when people are fearful, when they're strongly of one political party, which is the left-wing party which controlled the media throughout the pandemic and controls, I think, the vast majority of academic institutions and public health, when they're all one side, you don't get a good dialogue. You get a very skewed dialogue, a dialogue that doesn't allow a lot of other points of view, doesn't have debate. There were no debates as far as I'm aware of in places like Stanford and Hopkins about whether or not we should have school closure or lockdowns. These institutions forfeited their responsibility as brokers of academic discourse and dialogue during the pandemic. And they failed the American people, they failed the globe, ultimately. Now we're going to get these retrospectives by the same broken media that perpetuated the problems in the first place. Scott Galloway's comment, I think, naturally would irritate a lot of people. It irritated me to say, give me some grace. Well, no, not really. Where did you cut the grace for the people who were skeptical of vaccinating after having had COVID? Those people are ultimately vindicated. I didn't see them get any grace. I saw them lose their job. So are you going to pay restitutions to all the people who were fired, who didn't want to get vaccinated? Vaccine mandates were grossly unethical. In order to mandate a vaccine, you have to prove benefit to third parties. You never proved that. It's apparently the case that that's not the case. So do all those people get compensated? Once you have compensated them, then we can talk about forgiveness. But you haven't made the effort for all the policy errors, and there's so many other policy errors we didn't get into. You mask 2-year-olds. So all the people who mask 2-year-olds, have they apologized to the parents who were removed from airplanes if their 2-year-old didn't mask? Apologized to the parents who had to push back against the restrictions at their local daycare? Did they get an apology yet? So then why do you want the forgiveness? It's not earned yet. I think there are going to be a lot more retrospectives by the same people who are incapable of analyzing the policy questions the first time. They're not going to be useful or helpful, and I think we got to push back on it. So if you disagree with Scott Galloway, if you think that there should be some punishment, I think, for the people in public health who got it wrong, and by the way, while there should be some punishment for them, if you go to look at the National Academy of Medicines and who's winning all the awards, all of the people who are wrong about every single bit of COVID-19 policy are currently winning all the awards. They're winning the Lifetime Achievement Awards. They're being inducted to the National Academies. This is because the field suffers from groupthink and they won't admit that they got it wrong. Okay, so there's a lot of work that needs to be done if public health is going to be a credible scientific institution going forward. Right now, in my opinion, it's not yet credible. It is a one-sided institution that does not tolerate debate, that implemented a lot of policies with no evidence, that didn't have evidence generation, and that now, after the fact, wants to bamboozle us into a false history. Did COVID-19, was it airborne when it spread? Of course, you should have known that from the first choir practice. I agree with them. But do you need to change all the ventilators in 2023? I doubt it. Might that have been helpful in 2020? Maybe, but people probably wouldn't have gone to work anyway, so that's kind of a moot point. But in 2023, it's probably a fool's errand. Run a couple of randomized trials and tell me the dollar per quality on that. And until then, I gotta worry that you're just selling your consulting service. So if you like this video, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, comment, leave a message below. I've got some other videos coming out in the weeks to come, and I'll be back. Until next time.